Wagwan everybody. Today, we'll go through all the gang relations in GTA 3, every beef, every alliance, and each one described in detail. What was it about, between which gangs obviously, and how it started and ended if relevant. We'll more or less stick to the chronological order apart from the payphone missions, which we'll cover at the end, or at least most of it. And just a little notice for those who plan to watch the whole video without skipping anything. I'm sorry if some of the threads and information will be said multiple times, but that's for people who only need to watch selected chapters so they can still get all the info they need. However, I'll do my best to abstract each time the thread is discussed multiple times to make this watchable for everyone, hopefully. Without further ado, let's kick off with the first beef. Leones versus Diablos. Just for the record, the Leones are the gang Claude works for during the Portland section of the story, led by Salvatore Leone and holding their main turf in St. Mark's district. And the Diablos were a Hispanic gang run by El Burro, for whom Claude also works in the Portland payphone missions, and they were operating in Hepburn Heights. The beef between those two organizations was pretty minor, at least in 2001, because just 3 years earlier they were at war, as the Diablos, orchestrated by the Sicilians, took over Hepburn Heights from the hands of the Leone family. But back to 2001. This beef is only proved by 1 or 2 missions, but we'll get to that in a sec. The first mission though is Pump Action Pimp. In it, one of the capos of the Leone family, Luigi Gottarelli, orders Claude to kill a pimp that has been recently doing business on Luigi's turf, creating competition. That pimp was a member of the Diablos. The pimp gets killed, but there are no comebacks from the Diablos that we would be aware of. The second mission that potentially could also portray the same beef is one of the missions for El Burro, called I Scream, You Scream. In that mission, El Burro asks us to kill some gang members that were threatening him that if he doesn't give him a cut from his porn magazine business, they'll kill his starring actor. So he sends Claude to kill them, obviously. What's interesting is that them gangsters look identical to the members of the Leone family. However, we cannot be certain that they are the Leones, because the same skin is also used in the game for the Forelli Mafia members. Additionally, GTA Wiki actually says that those indeed are the Forellis. However, I don't know where this information comes from. In fact, I would be more in favor of the Leones here, as the hideout of the guys in the mission is located in the warehouses in Atlantic Keys, and in Liberty City Stories, one of those same warehouses was the base of operations of Vincenzo, back then one of the capos of the Leones, or most likely at least. But really, we can't be certain who really are them gangsters. All we can assume is that it's the Mafia, but which family, I don't know. Speaking of the Mafia families, now we go to the beef between the two Italian crime families. Again, the Leones and the Forellis. The Forellis were a very weak pseudo-mafia family in 2001. Their main business and at the same time base of operations was the St. Mark's Bistro in East North Portland. The leader of this gang is unknown. However, it's possible there is still Franco Forelli, who was their don 3 years earlier in GTA LCS. The beef in 2001 started when one of the members of the Forellis, Mike, was overdue on the payment of his debt he owed to Joey Leone, the Don Salvatore's son and an active member of the family gang. Joey was tired of waiting, so he had Mike killed. Soon, the beef had its continuation in another mission for Joey called Dead Skunk in the Trunk. Here, we ain't got much info, but what we know is that Joey had another member of the Forelli brothers killed and asked Claude to dispose of the body.
Right, there's a car stuffed with a stiff at the cafe near Callahan Point. One of the Forellis thought he was a wise guy, so he got what he had coming to him.
2 of the Forelli soldiers actually tried to stop that from happening, but failed. Other than that, the beef is mentioned by Curly Bob in the Cut in the Grass mission, where I was given a report of the ongoings to do with the Leones to Catalina.
Joey Leone has stirred up some bad blood with the Forellis.
And we got a mention of it in one of the Liberty Tree articles issued in July 2001. Leones versus the Triads. Now we get to a proper full-fledged gang war that took place in GTA 3. The Leones against the Chinese Triads. The Triads held their turf, obviously in Chinatown, and the leader is also unknown. The beef was initiated during the mission Farewell Chunky Lee Chong. Joey, again, this time orders Claude to get rid of Lee Chong, who was selling spank for the Colombian cartel. But he was doing it in the heart of Chinatown, and it kinda seems as if he was protected by the Triad. It's difficult to tell to which gang Lee belonged. On one hand, he was dealing in the Triad turf and he has a Chinese surname. On the other hand, Joey says that he was shotting drugs for the Colombians, but more about that in the next chapter. Whatever the case, Claude, while chasing after Lee, was attacked by the Triad, and considering that Lee was dealing in the Triad turf, they must have been getting a cut out of it. So technically, Joey was messing up their business, initiating this conflict, or reinitiating, because similarly to Diablos, the Triads also were at war with the Leones during the event of GTA LCS, so in 1998. Anyway, Lee Chong gets killed, and soon the Triads actually decided to hit back at the Leones by taking over the laundry place that before was paying protection to the Leones. Tony Cipriani, another capo of the Leones, could not accept that. He soon used Claude to mess up the laundry vans used by the laundrette to teach them a lesson and convince them to go back to paying protection money to the Leones, not the Triad. Typical case in GTA, right? Well, in any case, the thing worked and the laundry agreed to pay the Mafia. Tony asked Claude to collect the money. The Triad though ambushed Claude, with little effect though, as Claude just mashed them all up and returned the cash to Cipriani. Then the Triads tried to deal a severe blow to the Italian organization by attempting to assassinate 3 of the most important members, excluding Salvatore, that is Cipriani, Forelli and Joey Leone, while they were heading for the Don's mansion for a meeting. This attempt also failed. Now it was time for the Mafia to hit the Triad and finish them off. Plus, the laundry was still reluctant to pay, believing that the Triads were strong enough to protect them from the Mafia. That's why Tony asked Claude to kill 3 of the Triad warlords, which was obviously meant to significantly weaken the organization. And then the time came for the ultimate hit at the Triads. Tony wanted to destroy the Triad fish factory, which was supplying one of their main sources of income and served as a front for all the other shady business they were into. So destroying the factory meant no money from the fish trade, plus no way to launder the money from the illegal sources for the Triad. The task was successfully carried out by Claude, therefore ending the feud between the gangs in GTA 3. Triad and Colombians alliance. Exactly what we were talking about at the beginning of the previous chapter. Chunky Lee Chong, who was dealing spank for the Colombians, but he was doing it in the Triad turf, and judging by the surname and the fact that it looked as if he was protected by the Triad, he was most likely associated with the Triad or was a member of the gang. Therefore, it's easy to come to a conclusion that there was some form of an alliance/business partnership between the Colombian cartel and the Triad. It probably was a similar case to the Jamaicans, but we'll talk about that later. But essentially, the Colombians wanted to use the resources that the Triads had, so they decided to supply them with spank. The Triads were selling it in their neighborhood and giving some of the profits back to the Colombians. So a pretty simple pattern. Whether this partnership was ended by Claude's action, we don't really know. Leones versus Colombians. Another pretty big time war, this time between the Leones and the Colombian cartel. The cartel was a very strong organization in Liberty City, holding their turf in Wichita Gardens on Southside, Fort Staunton on Staunton Island, and also doing business in Portland, however without proper territory. We don't know for sure who led the gang, but we can assume that it was either Miguel or Catalina. Anyway, the first sign of this beef is yet again the mission Farewell Chunky Lee Chong, because since Chong was selling the drugs for the cartel and for the Triad, Joey, by killing him, was also mashing up cartel's business. The next we hear of this conflict is the mission Cutting the Grass. Salvatore doesn't like the fact that the Colombians began to push spank in Liberty, creating competition for them. Apparently, there already have been some encounters between the gangs, as Salvatore mentions that the Colombians seem to know their every move, as if the conflict was going on for some time already.
The Colombian cartel is making spank somewhere in Liberty, but we don't know where, and they seem to know everything we're doing before we do. We got us a rat.
As it turns out, the Colombians indeed got themselves an inside man within the Mafia in the shape of Curly Bob, who was reporting them everything that the Mafia planned. Salvatore realized that Bob was ratting him out and had him killed, simultaneously finding out the location of the Cartel spank factory in the shape of the container ship moored in Portland Harbor. The next step was to destroy that ship, and that task was carried out by Claude and Abel, dealing a severe blow to Colombians' business. Leone's and Colombians' alliance. And just as things started to look bad in terms of the war activity between the two gangs, they cut a deal and called a truce. The deal was that Salvatore would kill Claude for the Colombians, most likely in return for some money and leaving the Leone's business in Portland well alone. Sal agreed to that since he didn't trust Claude anyway. I think that the Colombians saw that they don't stand much chance against the Mafia, especially with such a psychopathic maniac as Claude on their side, which is partially why they wanted to get rid of him, to maybe in some time return to the war with the Leones once Claude is dead, or it was done specifically by Catalina, who wanted to finish a job that she left incomplete during the bank robbery at the beginning of the game. In any case, Salvatore agreed to set up Claude, which eventually failed, but the plan somewhat worked as Claude was forced to leave Portland and was no longer working for the Mafia. We don't know that for sure, but it's logical to assume that since that point, the Colombians and the Leones were at least on neutral terms. Leones versus Yakuza. The peace did not last long for the Mafia, as soon another conflict started with them involved, this time with the Yakuza. The Yakuza was the Japanese organization who held their turf mainly in Torrington, where their main legal business was situated, namely Kenji's Casino. The gang was led either by Asuka Kassen, or there may have been someone yet above her. That would be an equivalent of Toshiro, who was initially meant to be the boss of the Yakuza according to the design document for GTA 3. The first sign of the conflict between the gangs was Asuka helping Claude escape Portland, after he was set up and persecuted by the Leone Mafia ever since. This was not an open declaration of war though. We could say that the first severe hit dealt to the Mafia that was orchestrated by the Yakuza was the assassination of Salvatore Leone conducted by Claude. And technically, nobody knew that it was the Yakuza who sent Claude to kill Salvatore, although actually we can't really tell, but it's definitely one gang doing things that hurt another gang, so I reckon that I had to include it. Besides, there is a continuation to that, but there is a bit of a, well, actually it's a very bad mess to do with that. I'm talking about the following mission for Asuka called Under Surveillance. In the PS2 version, Asuka says that the Mafia are still trying to hunt Claude down, and therefore they are conducting surveillance of Yakuza's interest, which clearly tells us that they know that the Yakuza helped Claude.
My police source indicates that the Mafia are watching our interests around the city in a bid to track you down. We cannot continue our operations until they are dealt with. Take out these spying fools and end this vendetta once and for all.
But in the PC version, the Leones suddenly turn into FBI who were just trying to collect evidence on the important members of the Yakuza.
My police source indicates that the FBI has mounted a surveillance operation at key locations around the city. It is too late to contact anyone and avoid incrimination. Take out these spying cops, but be careful. They're bound to have backup.
However, in both versions, the skins of the dudes we gotta kill are the ones of the Mafia, so I'll personally assume the PS2 version as canon. In any case, Claude eliminates all the spies and there are no further encounters between the gangs that we'd be aware of. Yardies and Colombians alliance. Now we got a very similar case to the one with the Triads. The Yardies were a Jamaican gang who held their turf in Newport and King Courtney was their leader. In the mission Deal Still for Kenji, we'll find out that the Colombians also made a deal with the Jamaicans. Basically, they were supplying the Jamaicans with spank, then the Yardies sold it on the streets, and the Colombians were getting themselves a nice little percentage out of it. The negotiations of this deal were initially interrupted by the Yakuza, but eventually both parties managed to come to an agreement nonetheless, whose whose result we can see in the Smackdown mission, where Kenji sends Claude to whack the Yardie pushers who is selling spank for the cartel. And lastly, the mission called Kingdom Come, directly for King Courtney, in which he sets Claude up, or rather, he lures him into the trap set up by Catalina, who is a highly ranked member of the cartel. This once again shows that the Colombians and the Jamaicans were on good terms and were working together during the events of GTA 3. Yakuza vs Colombians. Now time for one of the most important gang wars in the whole story. It started with the mission Deal Still, described in the previous chapter as well. The genesis of this conflict was similar to the Colombians' conflict with the Leones. It was clear rivalry and striving towards eliminating the competition. Kenji finds out that the Colombians are supplying the Jamaicans with drugs, creating competition for the Yakuza. Now, the Yakuza didn't sell spank, but it is not particularly surprising that they still did not want any competition. See, as much as the Colombians would not directly take the customers away from the Yakuza, although that would also happen as the Yakuza may have been selling softer drugs than spank, and Yakuza's customers could stop buying them drugs off the Yakuza and try something stronger from the cartel. Anyway, even ignoring that, selling spank would make the Colombians a lot of cash, which would allow them to develop in different fields and potentially including those in which the Yakuza were investing. So it makes perfect sense why they didn't want anyone else in the market. Anyway, Kenji sends Claude to stop the deal between the Yardies and the Colombians from happening, which initially Claude carries out successfully. Soon though, it turns out that they still managed to cut a deal and the Yardies started selling for the Colombians. Then Kenji sends Claude again to kill some of the Yardie dealers, but it is unknown whether that was enough to end their spank pushing operation. But this stage of the conflict is nothing compared to how it escalated after the mission Wakagashira Wipeout for Donald Luff. Luff orders Claude to disguise himself as a Colombian and kill Kenji, a highly ranked member of the Yakuza, in order to initiate a serious war between the organizations, which in turn would lower the real estate prices in the area affected by this war, as people usually don't want to live or run a business in a place where some assholes are shooting each other on streets in broad daylight. Anyway, Claude makes it happen and now the real war kicks off. In the mission Grand Theft Aero, also for Donald, we witness Asuka, so most likely the leader of the Yakuza in Liberty City, capturing Miguel, who coincidentally also was most likely the leader of the cartel. From a dialogue, we can hear that Asuka's mad pissed at the Colombians and set herself as a target to mash up their whole gang, as a comeback for killing her brother Kenji, that is of course. She also asks Claude to help her achieve that objective. First, we got a very similar concept to the Under Surveillance mission, so Claude has to hunt down the cartel spies that were trying to track him down in order to capture him and make him their dog's dinner. However, not exactly, because Claude has to first lure the Colombians to the spot in which the Yakuza soldiers were waiting to mash them up there. Why? Great question. I'd also like to know the answer to that, so if you got any logical ideas of what was the thought process of Asuka behind this whole plan, then let me know in the comments. In any case, in the next mission for Asuka, she gets Claude to destroy the supposed espresso stands run by the cartel, that in reality were just another front for their spank selling operation. And finally, Asuka finds out from Miguel, who she tortured and interrogated by the way, about a big shipment of spank that was about to arrive in Liberty City in a plane. And you know the drill. Claude goes, kills yet another pack of angry South Americans, and blows the plane up to pieces, magically leaving the drugs that were inside untouched in perfect condition. Guess they were wrapped in some titanium foil or something. Yeah, either way, before Claude could return the packages to Asuka, Catalina paid her a visit, killed Miguel, kidnapped Maria, but most importantly in today's video, killed Asuka. And that act was the last story act to that beef. It didn't end there though, as later we can often encounter both gangs shooting at one another while driving through Fort Staunton, for example. Yakuza vs Yardies. The third and the last gang relation exposed in the Deal Still mission. The Colombians were supplying the Jamaicans with spank, Therefore, both gangs were creating competition for the Yakuza, which Kenji did not like. So he first sabotaged the meeting between the Yardies and the Colombians, and later sent Claude to kill the Yardie dealers who were pushing spank on the streets of Liberty City. And additionally, we got the mission Gang Car Roundup for King Courtney, the boss of the Jamaicans, in which he asks Claude to steal a Yakuza car and deliver it for him, so then he can use it for sabotage. Granted, we do not know what or if Courtney eventually done anything shady with that car, but the sole theft of the car is an act against all the acts that would potentially lead to an act against the Yakuza, so I felt obliged to include it. Yakuza versus Diablos. A very minor beef, but still a beef. In the mission Shima for Kenji, the Diablos stole the money from one of the shops that was paying protection to the Yakuza. After Claude found out about it, he yet again used his extraordinary wizarding ability, used legitimacy techniques to read the shop owner's mind to find out that it was the Diablos responsible for this insolent act. And so he went to their territory in Hepburn Heights, where they obviously, totally coincidentally were hanging out on the estate with a suitcase with the Yakuza's protection money. Claude killed them all off, grabbed the cash, returned it to Kenji, and the Diablos have not dared to lay a glove on the Japanese ever again, or at least not as far as we're aware. Diablos versus Triads. And now it's time for the last part of the episode, so the payphone missions and the gang relations exposed by them. In the mission Trial by Fire, El Burro gets Claude to go to Chinatown and burn 25 Triad gang members alive, cause them insolent mafias have destroyed El Burro's whip, in which he was keeping some collection of some items that I honestly do not want to know too much about, apart from the fact that they apparently meant a lot to El Burro. Besides, I don't know who the f keeps their valuable memorabilia in a bloody car. Well, anyway, it got him angry, so he wanted to hit back at the Triads, and that was pretty much the whole beef. Nothing else we'd know about happened after that. Yardies versus Diablos. In the mission Uzi Rider, Claude is sent by King Courtney to drive by some Diablos as revenge, cause the Diablos were batting up the Lady Queen Lizzie.
We're going for a little ride into Hepburn Heights. Kill me some filthy Diablo boo-boos been batting up me Lady Queen Lizzie.
In Jamaican patois, to bad up means to treat someone in a violent manner. Now, I don't know whether this Queen Lizzie was a wife of King Courtney or the wife of that rude boy that introduces us to the job, but I guess she must have been someone important, and apparently the Diablos were treating her in a very violent way. So the Yardies had to hit back, which they did with the help of Claude. In the next mission, Claude steals a Diablo car for Courtney, so he can use it to stir up some ish disguised as the Diablos, but we don't get to see the execution of that plan, as well as any continuation of this conflict in the game. Yardies versus Leones. This one's very minor. In the Gang Car Roundup mission, apart from cars of the Yakuza and the Diablos, Courtney also asks us to steal a Leone's car for the same reason as the other two, in order to use it for sabotage in the future. But here again, we don't get to see whether the Jamaicans actually utilized that vehicle for any shady deeds. Red Jacks versus Purple Nines. And now we go to the last beef we're gonna talk about in this video, and that is the beef between the two African American gangs that previously were united but split, most likely after one of them wanted to deal spank, while the other found it against their code. The Purple Nines were the ones that wanted to try the spank business, and the Red Jacks were the ones definitely against it. First, in the mission Uzi Money, the boss of the Red Jacks, D.S., sent Claude to perform drive-by on the Purple Nines members, as he wanted to eliminate that gang from the territory, as he didn't want any competition, plus most likely was not keen to the idea of his neighborhood being affected by spank, so he wanted to get rid of its only source. Then, in the mission Toyminator, Claude is asked to destroy the armored vans that the Nines equipped themselves with, and which they used to protect themselves while selling spank. And finally, after those two severe blows for the Nines, there is a final encounter organized between the two gangs in the park of Wichita Gardens. This rumble is meant to be an honorable fight with no guns or cars. The fight is won by Claude and D-Ice's brother, and it served as a nail to the Purple Nines' coffin, ending their history in Liberty City. On a side note, I have a suspicion that the Purple Knights may have also been supplied by the Colombians, who'd collect a percentage of the profits from pushing Spank by the Nines. However, it's not confirmed or even suggested by any means, apart from the fact of the existence of similar deals of the Colombians with the Triads and the Yardies, which we talked about earlier. Let me know what you think of that theory. And let me know what you think of the whole video. Make sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you like to watch videos on this channel in general. If you're into GTA 3's lore, I recommend you check out the video in which I explain the background and motives of every betrayal of Claude in the game's story. Meanwhile, thank you for watching. Respect.